Do you feel the entire world within you, as if the suffering, joys, and fears of those around you were your own pain? Have you ever noticed that, no matter how hard you try to protect yourself, the emotions of others invade, weigh you down, and confuse you? If this sounds familiar, know that it's not just sensitivity, it's something much deeper, more complex, and darker. A warning from Carl Jung, which few have the courage to heed, reveals the true nature of the empath. Not a delicate soul that merely feels, but an open psychic field, a conductor of humanity's collective shadows and lights. This openness, which seems like a gift, can turn into a cruel trap. Jung warns us that the true empath is not a smiling, light-hearted spiritual caricature, but a bearer of burdens that are not their own, shadows from others that lodge in the soul, and often the empath doesn't even know what possesses them. Empathy, popularized as a gentle feeling, has been so simplified that it has lost its true power and archetypal complexity. What is truly at stake is a deep dive into the abyss of the collective unconscious, where ancient and invisible forces circulate. Imagine an ancient healer, kneeling on the agonizing earth, vomiting blood, not because his body is sick, but because he feels the suffering of the entire earth. This is the empath. One who absorbs pain that is not his own, who transfers the sorrows of the world to himself, and carries an invisible and unsustainable burden. If this function is not brought to the light of consciousness, the empath is doomed to be devoured by it. In a dream Jung had, an eyeless woman stands on a bridge, hands outstretched, trembling between the desire to seek help and the effort to ward off the desperate voices echoing in the abyss below. She feels every scream, every pain, every fear, as if her body were an open wound. This woman represents the empath, the one who cannot see where her suffering comes from, who cannot distinguish where she ends and the other begins, who becomes a psychic sponge, unsure how to wring herself out, how to clean herself. The unconscious has no morals. It is a sacred and chaotic cauldron. When an empath opens themselves to another's psyche, whether through compassion or energetic permeability, they invite that person's unresolved shadow into themselves. And most people carry long, heavy, rejected shadows that seek refuge in another. The empath, without protection, becomes that refuge. There is an African story of a young man who heard the cries of nameless spirits on the edge of the forest. They didn't speak, only sent feelings, waves of sadness, terror, longing. The young man wept and trembled, until an elder taught him to name and dialogue with these spirits, not to banish them, but to understand them. This is the lesson for the empath. Being a playground for dispossessed archetypes is dangerous. Being a conscious empath, who names what they carry, is the path of the alchemist. Saying, "I feel what others feel," isn't enough. We need to go further. Why do I feel? Where does this come from within me? What do I do with it? Empathy can be a subtle possession, for the unconscious is a trickster that doesn't always reveal itself with horns and fire. Sometimes it arrives as overwhelming compassion that drowns, as a compulsive need to help that destroys one's own limits. I've seen empaths fall in love with those who destroy them, not out of weakness, but because their unconscious wounds have been seduced, turning them into silent caretakers, sponges that absorb everything. This is a dark union. The healer becomes the wounded, the bearer of light, the host of another's shadow. The longer this continues, the more the empath loses their sense of self. You need to understand, your gift isn't just emotional, it's psychic, archetypal. You tune into the collective currents that shape humanity. When someone enters your presence, it's not just the smile or the tear that you perceive, it's the lineage, the buried gods, the unlived lives. Without contact with your own unconscious, without having traversed your inner underworld, you will be crushed. There is a spiritual temptation to romanticize sensitivity, but the soul knows that all light casts shadows, and empathy is one of the functions that most often brings the shadow to the surface. Do you know what happens to those who repress anger for years? It doesn't disappear. It finds a home in the psychic realm. When this person encounters an unconscious empath, this anger flares up like fire on dry wood, and the empath feels irritated, depressed, and inflamed, carrying a flame that isn't their own. I treated a woman who cried before she could even speak, believing she was wounded by her parents, her lovers, and the world. Over time, we revealed that she carried the unmourned grief of her mother, her grandmother, and the women in her lineage, who were forbidden to cry. She became a vessel of ancestral suffering and lost the language for her own pain. If you're an empath and don't delineate what's yours from what's others, you'll drown in a sea of nameless ghosts. Feeling is sacred, but the sacred requires structure. The vessel must be strong to contain the fire, otherwise, the fire consumes you. Another dream, a man in a cathedral of mirrors, his every step echoing strange voices. He looks into one mirror and sees a child crying, in another, a soldier screaming, in another, a mother dying. He cries out, "Which one am I?" But the mirrors don't respond, they only reflect. The empath is lost, invisible to himself, drowned in the pain of others, oblivious to his original face. If this resonates with you, ask yourself, what work have you done to understand yourself? Have you faced the parts of you that use empathy to feel important or holy? Have you faced the dark pleasure of being the only one who understands another's pain? Even empaths have shadows. Sometimes helping means avoiding yourself. The weight of others' suffering is more comforting than the silence of facing your own. We dress our escape in virtue, and the unconscious smiles behind the veil. Empathy is not salvation, it is a threshold to be crossed with wisdom. Learn to perceive boundaries not as walls, but as membranes of the individuated soul. I feel you, but I do not become you. I see your wound, but I do not harbor it. I offer presence, not possession. That's the goal, to witness without absorbing. The empath's greatest tragedy is to lose themselves in the suffering of others, their soul reduced to a whisper. This occurs in marriages, families, and professions where the empath becomes an emotional regulator, confusing compassion with codependency. Its archetypal possession, the empath absorbs the archetype of the wounded healer, Chiron, who demands suffering as purpose. This is a distortion, an identity tied to constant pain, without conscious transformation. The empath loses autonomy because the archetype controls them. Archetypes are not metaphors, they are living, ancestral patterns. When you feel drawn to help, exhausted from leaving a place, euphoric at being needed, stop. These are not just your emotions. They are invisible voices acting on your behalf, savior, martyr, mother, seducer, that can turn the empath into a puppet. Puppets don't individuate, they just act. The empath must perform the sacred act of separation, not of love, but of fusion, to stand before another's pain and say, I won't abandon you, but I won't bleed for you. To feel the grief and say, I will be by your side, but I won't become the ocean. Imagine an ancient, tangled forest with a deep well. Around it, empaths weep, hoping their tears will bring the shadows into the light, but the well is endless, and their tears only fuel the darkness. This is the compulsion of empathy, to feed the darkness it seeks to redeem. Few speak out, not everyone wants to be healed, not every soul wants to awaken. The empath who confuses gift with responsibility will be pulled down along with the reluctant. Discernment is necessary. Does your empathy liberate or imprison? Does it honor the other's path or violate it? Even healing can be fear-driven control. Parents who smother children, lovers who manipulate, friends who use compassion as currency, it's the dark side of empathy where care becomes power. You may deny it, but if you're an empath, look within. Where did your gift become a mask? Where did you confuse connection with obligation? Where did it become essential to avoid loneliness? It's not judgment, it's integration. True empathy is bearing witness without losing your center, remaining in the fire of another's pain without getting burned, not through distance, but through firm roots in the self. This self is light and shadow, instinct, history, future, the living center of the psyche, where archetypes orbit. When the empath finds this center, they become grounded, and their compassion is strength, not sacrifice. But this path is arduous. It requires descending into the inner underworld, confronting parts that like to be needed, fear abandonment, and confuse intimacy with imprisonment, childhood survival strategies. Many empaths emerge from trauma. Children who learned to read moods to avoid anger, boys who tuned into their mother's depression to heal it. Sensitivity is born of need, and need is born of fear. A gift born of fear needs to be purified. Ask yourself, who was I before the world taught me to feel for others? What part of me believes that loving must hurt? What happens if I don't absorb other people's pain? Who would I be? And would I still be loved? These questions are initiatory thresholds, the true test of the empath, to feel and remain whole, to love without bleeding, to help without emptying oneself, to see pain without being defined by it, not detachment, but mastery. Imagine a woman before a fire, holding a container of her tears. The storm rages, but she whispers to herself, I feel you, but I am not you. The storm calms, not because it has absorbed her, but because it has ceased to resist its own sovereignty. This is the empath, not a sponge, but a vessel, not a martyr, but a mystic, not a savior, but a mirror. The deeper we delve into this territory, the more the world of dreams reveals the truth of the gift, empathy in its symbolic, alchemical, raw form. I met a young empath who felt an invisible weight on his chest, as if his soul were dissolving into someone else's story. He came here fearing disappearance, bringing a dream where beloved faces floated in the darkness, calling his name. He tried to escape, but he was trapped. A voice whispered, "You have made this your temple." He built a psychic church of pain, mistaking suffering for purpose. It became a sanctuary for lost voices, but the soul does not thrive in a temple of ghosts. Dreams show what we avoid seeing. For the empath, they reveal hidden contracts with pain. If I suffer with them, they won't be alone. If I absorb their anger, they won't explode. If I disappear, they'll have space. But the unconscious doesn't reward martyrdom. It demands balance, truth, and confrontation. If he wants to, the empath must take back what he gave up, not out of selfishness, but out of sovereignty. This is the call of individuation, to be whole, not a mask, reflection, or trauma, but to be true. The empath must descend into their cave and ask, "What is my anger teaching me? What grief am I hiding? What part of me is addicted to being hurt? What part of me is addicted to saving others?" This work destroys illusions, dismantles noble identities, reveals hidden wounds, demands that we stop bleeding on altars that were not made for this, and accept that others feel our pain. Conscious empathy is holy, unconscious, contamination, collapse of boundaries, flooding with waste that does not belong. These residues are profound. There is ancestral intertwining, inherited sensitivity. A woman may carry the sensitivity of her great-grandmother, a man, the guilt of ancestors burned for witchcraft. Empathy can be the bearer of ancestral suffering, a long echo-seeking voice in a sensitive descendant. If this descendant does not awaken, it becomes a vessel of unconscious repetition. Dreams reveal powerful archetypal symbols: serpents in the heart, oceans swallowing children, ancestral homes in flames. They're not personal, they're the language of the deep psyche warning you, you're too full of what isn't yours. I remember an artist patient who dreamed of sculptures of people she knew, each with a sign reading, "Property of the dead." She touched them, and they bled. It was instruction. Her empathy became necromancy, a constant reach into the past of other souls. You need to not less feel, but discern. Some pain is sacred to witness, other pain needs to be buried. Unconscious empaths become grave diggers of the collective, mistaking every wound for a soul to save. But not all pain seeks healing, some seeks extinction, and interfering with that is playing gods in a theater we don't understand. What to do? Don't harden your heart, don't run away from the wounded, but refine your empathy. From sponge to sword, from open wound to attentive mirror, from martyrdom to mysticism. The true empath is initiated. He has walked the shadow realm, embraced its pain, and spoken with its anger, shame, and terror. He does not confuse empathy with fusion. He feels without falling, witnesses without absorbing, loves without losing. From such a place, your gift is a lamp, not a burden. It illuminates without burning, guides without dragging, offers presence without saving. And you know that your job is not to carry the world, but to carry yourself, with such integrity that the world remembers how to carry itself. We have reached the threshold not of despair, but of transformation. Everything revealed demands one thing: incarnation. Not admiration or analysis. The empath who has traversed the darkness, who has returned with honesty, is not a broken healer nor an eternal sponge, but an initiated presence, a living vessel of the self that knows. Empathy is alchemy, a fire to recognize, not adopt, to witness, not possess, to transform, never to steal. When conscious, the empath no longer walks into rooms looking for pain to mend. He walks as a mirror, not to reflect wounds, but to show others who they could be. He becomes the wounded mystic, not because he still bleeds, but because his scars are symbols of surviving union with the unconscious and returning with wisdom. There is, however, a subtle danger. The empowered empath can awaken another archetype, the magician. The one who sees beyond illusions, who knows the secrets of energetic exchange, who speaks to the shadow of the other without fear. But if not anchored in humility, the magician believes himself superior to suffering, seduced by the vision, weaponizes wisdom, and repeats the cycle, this time with more subtle masks. Thus, Initiation is not a trophy, but constant vigilance. Being a conscious empath means waking up every day and asking, is this mine? Am I feeling or merging? Healing or controlling? Present or acting? These questions aren't doubts, but maturity. The conscious empath doesn't fear the uncertain, doesn't rush to fix things, allows silence, leaves the broken without rushing in as a savior, trusts in psychic intelligence, because sometimes pain is a gateway, not an enemy. And in relationships, everything changes. The unconscious empath is drawn to the wounded, chaotic, and narcissistic, not out of naivete, but because they believe they must prove their worth through endurance. They attract those who reflect their unhealed inner child, the one who learned that love is earned through suffering. The conscious empath seeks clarity, wanting to be seen, not just needed. They create bonds in truth, not in trauma. And if loneliness comes, they don't fill it with ghosts, but sit with it, listening to the silence. Here, the empath reclaims his gift, not a recipient of pain, but a revealer of the soul. He doesn't hide his intuition to please, he doesn't bend boundaries to avoid abandonment. He knows that saying no protects the sacred within. I dreamed of a calm lake, infinite silver. On the shore, people I'd known, of different ages, gazed into the lake, searching for answers. In the center, a single, unperturbed figure. Wordless, simply being. Those who looked into his eyes saw not wounds, nor needs, but the image of what could be. This is the destiny of the awakened empath, to be a mirror, not for pain, but for potential, to walk not as a martyr, but as a memory, to feel not everything, but what is true, to carry not the pain of the world, but the vibration of integrity. Thus, it does not abandon feeling, it transcends, it does not drown, it transforms, it becomes what alchemy has always pointed out, union of opposites, heart and spine, open palm and firm root, healer and human. If you recognize yourself, if you have seen in your dreams the symbols of giving too much, of emotional hunger, of sacred exhaustion, know that it is not a condemnation, it is an invitation. Move away from the shadows that are not yours, turn inward, face. When the light of awareness begins to illuminate the dark corners of empathy, a fundamental challenge arises, learning to distinguish what is one's own from what belongs to another. This is the delicate and often painful point that the empath must face to avoid becoming lost in a labyrinth with no exit, where one's own self is diluted by the suffering of others. The line between feeling deeply and being consumed by the pain of others is tenuous and requires, above all, constant vigilance. Carl Jung taught us that true individuation, the process of becoming who one truly is, relies on building internal boundaries that protect the sacred space of the self. For empaths, this task is even more urgent, because their sensitivity makes them vulnerable to invisible invasions, to absorbing feelings and energies that are not their own. And this invasion, when unconscious, acts like a silent thief, draining vitality, confusing identity, and spreading a profound sense of exhaustion. Imagine yourself in a crowded room where the crowd is constantly talking, each voice carrying a different emotional charge. You, the empath, are there in the middle, but not as a distant observer, but as an open vessel. Every word, every sigh, every outburst penetrates you, echoing your own feelings, making the weight of the world literally become yours. Without the proper tools, without awareness of what's happening, this weight grows until it becomes unbearable, an invisible prison that seems to pull you down relentlessly. But there is a path for this prison to become freedom, for the burden to transform into vital energy. And this path begins with awareness, with awakening to what is truly happening within you. It's not about shutting yourself off from the world, becoming cold or indifferent, but about learning to be a selective channel, a bridge that connects without dissolving. It's the art of feeling without absorbing, of accompanying without burdening, of loving without losing yourself. This awakening is an invitation for the empath to develop what Jung called a psychic membrane, a porous, living boundary that allows the passage of what nourishes and blocks what destroys. Building this membrane is no easy task. It takes courage to look within, to recognize where you have become confused with the suffering of others, to identify the patterns that make you sacrifice yourself in the name of unbalanced compassion. But it is precisely this courage that transforms the empath into a true alchemist of the soul. You can start with small practices of emotional self-care, learning to say no without guilt, recognizing when you need to step away to recharge. You can start paying attention to the sensations in your body, which are often the first signs that your energy is being drained. You can cultivate silence and solitude as sacred spaces for reconnecting with yourself. When you embark on this journey of self-discovery and self-care, You're not only protecting your emotional health, you're also expanding your power to truly love and help in a way that doesn't empty you, but strengthens you. After all, a full vessel can spill water, a cracked vessel will never quench its thirst. If this content touches something deep within you, if this search for balance between feeling and preserving resonates, I invite you to stay with us, to subscribe to receive more reflections that help build this membrane, this invisible but essential force. It's a community that grows precisely because each person chooses to walk with awareness, taking care of themselves so they can care for others without losing themselves. True empathy is born not from sacrifice, but from conscious presence. And this presence only blossoms when you know who you are beyond the weight you carry, when you are clear about what belongs to you and what you need to let go of. It's a daily practice, a delicate dance between openness and protection, surrender and steadfastness. So, feel welcomed into this space of discovery. Here, the journey is made side by side, with respect and care. Sign up so we can continue together, delving deeper into these topics, uncovering the shadows, and celebrating the light that each empath carries within. Because recognizing the shadow is the first step to unleashing the power it holds. Remember, you are not alone, and this seemingly lonely path can be navigated with strength, wisdom, and support. Your gift is precious, and when properly understood, it becomes an inexhaustible source of healing, for you and for the world. Have you ever noticed how empathy, when unconscious, can become a labyrinth from which it's difficult to escape? Not because the world is cruel or because those who suffer want to destroy us, but because, by absorbing the suffering of others without filters, we begin to lose track of where the other ends and where we ourselves begin. This loss of the boundary between self and other is one of the most dangerous traps for the empath. A slow, silent dissolution of identity, a kind of internal erosion that corrodes the soul. The unconscious empath not only feels what the other feels, they incorporate their pain, frustrations, and anguish as if they were their own. Imagine a river that receives powerful, dirty tributaries, and which, without dikes or clear banks, overflows and floods everything around it. This is the case for the empath who has not learned to contain, discern, and protect their inner field. They become a flooded territory, where the other's energy flows freely, often transforming them into an invisible prisoner. But why does this loss occur? Why is it so difficult for empaths to build these boundaries? The answer lies in the deep desire for connection that inhabits their essence, a genuine yearning to unite with another, to ease their pain, to be a safe haven. This longing, when not consciously addressed, can lead to a compulsion to help, to always be available, to lose oneself in the other as a way to validate one's own existence. Carl Jung warned us about the danger of over-identifying with the archetypes that operate within our psyche. Empaths can find themselves trapped in the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who believes their worth lies in their shared suffering, in bearing the pain of others as proof of their kindness and dedication. But this path is a trap. What begins as altruism can turn into martyrdom, and martyrdom into a loss of autonomy. This archetype of the wounded healer, also known as Chiron in mythology, represents the wound that never fully heals, the suffering that gives meaning to existence. For the empath, this wound can be the foundation on which they build their identity, unaware that they are trapped in a painful repetition that leads not to healing, but to constant suffering. This unconscious process explains why many empaths feel exhausted, empty, and even depressed, even when they dedicate their lives to helping others. They carry unintegrated shadows, unprocessed pain, and become involuntary hosts of emotional burdens that don't belong to them. The lack of awareness of this phenomenon causes this cycle to perpetuate, and the empath continues to sacrifice themselves, without recognizing the full price they pay. The fundamental question for those who recognize themselves in this condition is, how can we break this cycle? How can we escape the role of victim of our own sensitivity and assume leadership in our own lives? The answer is not simple, but it involves the path of individuation, the profound process of self-knowledge and integration of the shadow that Jung so valued. Individuation means, above all, rediscovering one's own identity, separating oneself from fusion with others, and recognizing oneself as a unique, complete being worthy of care. For the empath, this individuation involves developing a healthy relationship with one's own emotions and the emotions of others, learning to recognize which feelings are truly one's own and which are projections or borrowed burdens. This process requires immense courage, as it involves confronting dark aspects of oneself, fears, insecurities, repressed desires, that have often been masked by the compulsion to care for others. It's a dive into one's own inner cave, where the empath discovers not only their gifts but also their deepest wounds. One of the essential tools on this journey is the practice of conscious self-care, which goes far beyond occasional moments of rest. It's about cultivating a vigilant and loving presence with yourself, capable of establishing clear boundaries and respecting them, even when faced with internal pressure to meet external demands. Learning to say no without guilt, to withdraw when necessary, and to recognize the signals from your body and mind that indicate overload are fundamental steps to building this protective psychic membrane that separates what is yours from what is not. This membrane is not a cold, insurmountable barrier, but a flexible and wise frontier that welcomes what nourishes and repels what corrodes. Another crucial aspect is the development of energetic awareness, the ability to perceive when one is connecting with another's emotional field and when one is being invaded by it. This awareness allows the empath to act with discernment, choosing where to place their attention and energy, avoiding straying into territories that do not belong to them. Empaths also need to learn to transform their sensitivity into creative power, channeling this energy into activities that promote balance and personal growth. Art, writing, meditation, and contact with nature are paths that help transmute this intense psychic energy, allowing it to manifest in constructive and transformative ways. Ultimately, this path is about rediscovering sovereignty over one's own being, taking control of one's own narrative, and ceasing to live as a victim of one's own empathy. It's about reclaiming the right to be whole, with light and shadow, and using the gift of sensitivity to create a life that respects and honors oneself. And this journey is never lonely. Although empaths often feel isolated in their pain and complexity, there is an invisible community of souls who share this quest, who recognize the same challenges, and who, together, can strengthen each other. Thus, the awakened empath is not just a passive recipient of the world's emotions, but an active agent of transformation, an alchemist of the soul who learns to transform invisible heaviness into tangible light, borrowed pain into genuine wisdom, vulnerability into quiet strength. Recognizing this truth is liberating, but it requires commitment, patience, and deep self-love. For the empath who chooses this path finds not only inner peace but also the ability to be fully present for others, without losing themselves along the way. And this, perhaps, is the greatest gift an empath can offer the world. The depth of what it means to be an empath goes far beyond the simple ability to feel what others feel. There is a darker, more complex dimension that few recognize, and which many empaths experience daily in silence, as if carrying an invisible shadow that follows them wherever they go. This shadow is made not only of emotions, but of energies, ancestral memories, and archetypes that intertwine within their souls, creating a complex dance between light and darkness. When empaths are unaware of this reality, they become a constant victim of the psychic currents that course through them. It's as if they're on an invisible battlefield, where every encounter, every relationship, can be an emotional flashpoint, an opening for the suffering of others that infiltrates their own being. What many mistake for fragility is actually the brute strength of those who carry more than they should, a weight not chosen, but imposed by the collective unconscious. Carl Jung warned us that empathy is not just an emotional gift, but a psychic function deeply rooted in ancient archetypes. These universal patterns operate in the shadows of consciousness and can possess the empath, leading them to become true, wounded healers, suffering on behalf of others, repeating cycles of pain without realizing they are trapped in a limiting and exhausting role. This archetype, known as Chiron, symbolizes the wound that never fully heals, a paradox of pain and power. Empaths who are unaware of this dynamic risk identifying entirely with their pain, constructing an identity based on shared suffering. Thus, they lose their autonomy, becoming hostage to the shadow they carry. This unconscious process explains why many empaths feel exhausted, empty, and even depressed, even when they dedicate their lives to helping others. They carry unintegrated shadows, unprocessed pain, and become involuntary hosts of emotional burdens that don't belong to them. The lack of awareness of this phenomenon causes this cycle to perpetuate, and the empath continues to sacrifice themselves, without recognizing the full price they pay. The fundamental question for those who recognize themselves in this condition is, how can we break this cycle? How can we escape the role of victim of our own sensitivity and assume leadership in our own lives? The answer is not simple, but it involves the path of individuation, the profound process of self-knowledge and integration of the shadow that Jung so valued. Individuation means, above all, rediscovering one's own identity, separating oneself from fusion with others, and recognizing oneself as a unique, complete being worthy of care. For the empath, This individuation involves developing a healthy relationship with one's own emotions and the emotions of others, learning to recognize which feelings are truly one's own and which are projections or borrowed burdens. This process requires immense courage, as it involves confronting dark aspects of oneself, fears, insecurities, repressed desires, that have often been masked by the compulsion to care for others. It's a dive into one's own inner cave, where the empath discovers not only their gifts but also their deepest wounds. One of the essential tools on this journey is the practice of conscious self-care, which goes far beyond occasional moments of rest. It's about cultivating a vigilant and loving presence with yourself, capable of establishing clear boundaries and respecting them, even when faced with internal pressure to meet external demands. Learning to say no without guilt, to step away when necessary, and to recognize the signals from your body and mind that indicate overload are fundamental steps in building this protective psychic membrane that separates what is yours from what is not. This membrane is not a cold, insurmountable barrier, but a flexible and wise frontier that welcomes what nourishes and repels what corrodes. Another crucial aspect is the development of energetic awareness, the ability to perceive when one is connecting with another's emotional field and when one is being invaded by it. This awareness allows the empath to act with discernment, choosing where to place their attention and energy, avoiding straying into territories that do not belong to them. Empaths also need to learn to transform their sensitivity into creative power, channeling this energy into activities that promote balance and personal growth. Art, writing, meditation, and contact with nature are paths that help transmute this intense psychic energy, allowing it to manifest in constructive and transformative ways. Ultimately, this path is about rediscovering sovereignty over one's own being, taking control of one's own narrative, and ceasing to live as a victim of one's own empathy. It's about reclaiming the right to be whole, with light and shadow, and using the gift of sensitivity to create a life that respects and honors oneself. And this journey is never lonely. Although empaths often feel isolated in their pain and complexity, there is an invisible community of souls who share this quest, who recognize the same challenges, and who, together, can strengthen each other. Thus, the awakened empath is not just a passive recipient of the world's emotions, but an active agent of transformation, an alchemist of the soul who learns to transform invisible heaviness into tangible light, borrowed pain into genuine wisdom, vulnerability into quiet strength. Recognizing this truth is liberating, but it requires commitment, patience, and deep self-love. For the empath who chooses this path finds not only inner peace but also the ability to be fully present for others, without losing themselves along the way. And this, perhaps, is the greatest gift an empath can offer the world. The empath's awakening to the depths of their own shadow is a call to a journey that goes far beyond anything they imagined. It's not just about understanding what they feel or why they absorb the suffering of others, but about unveiling the mysteries hidden within their psyche, those invisible layers where ancient traumas, limiting beliefs, and ancestral patterns are stored, silently shaping their lives and relationships. This shadow, which many avoid looking at, is a sacred and frightening territory at once, where both the monsters and the treasures of the soul reside. For the empath, this shadow is especially complex because it is formed not only by their own unconscious contents, but also by the pains, fears, and wounds they unconsciously carry from past generations. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious is a repository of these ancestral human experiences, and the empath, due to their heightened sensitivity, often tunes into these emotional waves that traverse time and space. Thus, they not only absorb the current pains around them, but also become a receptacle for ancestral suffering, untold stories, and tears that were never shed. This psychic inheritance can manifest itself in a variety of ways. Through unexplained physical symptoms, intense and seemingly disproportionate emotions, or vivid, symbolic dreams that evoke powerful and disturbing images. For example, an empath may feel a deep, inexplicable sadness, as if mourning someone they've never met, or an unexplained anxiety, as if carrying the collective fear of times of persecution, war, or loss. These manifestations are clear signs that the ancestral shadow is active, crying out for recognition and integration. Recognizing this ancestry isn't easy. It requires courage to face not only one's own wounds, but also those that have been passed down as a legacy, often unconsciously. It's necessary to confront painful family histories, repeated patterns of behavior, and collective traumas that were repressed so that the lineage could survive. This inward look is an act of love and resistance, a way to break cycles that are silently perpetuated from generation to generation. By doing this work, the empath begins to understand that their empathy is not just a gift for feeling others, but a profound responsibility for their own healing and the collective healing. Jung asserted that only by integrating the personal and collective shadow can we achieve individuation, the fullness of being. For the empath, this integration is an ongoing process of self-exploration, which involves recognizing the projections they carry, the roles they unconsciously assume, and the emotional bonds that bind them to destructive dynamics. One of the biggest challenges on this journey is identifying when empathy turns into codependency, when the need to help others becomes a way to avoid confronting oneself. Many empaths fall into this trap, believing that their worth is tied to their ability to care, sacrifice, and endure the suffering of others. This deep-seated belief can lead them to unbalanced relationships, where they become victims and perpetrators simultaneously, losing touch with their own truth. To break this dynamic, it's essential for the empath to develop what Jung called a psychic membrane, an internal boundary that allows the selective passage of emotions and energies, protecting them from being invaded or absorbed by the external world. This membrane is not a rigid or isolating barrier, but a flexible and conscious layer that allows one to be open to others without losing oneself. Building this protection is a process that requires self-knowledge, discipline, and daily practice. Practices such as meditation, bodywork, therapeutic writing, and conscious contact with nature are powerful tools for strengthening this membrane. They help empaths recognize their own limits, recognize signs of overload, and cultivate an internal space of calm and centering. Furthermore, therapeutic support can be crucial for untying the deepest emotional knots and working through the ancestral wounds that still weigh on the soul. Building this psychic boundary also involves learning to communicate your limits clearly and lovingly, both to yourself and to others. Saying no without guilt, stepping away when necessary, and respecting your needs isn't an act of selfishness, but rather a way of preserving your integrity and emotional health. This approach strengthens the empath and allows them to be genuinely available to others, without losing themselves in their pain. Another essential aspect for empaths is developing energetic awareness, the ability to distinguish when they're picking up on another person's emotions and when they're feeling something that truly belongs to them. This awareness is a key factor that transforms empaths from passive sponges into active channels, capable of choosing where to direct their attention and energy. Learning to filter and transmute these energies is a crucial step for empaths to live in balance and fulfillment. As empaths progress on this journey, they realize that their gift is an inexhaustible source of wisdom and healing, as long as it is exercised responsibly and consciously. They learn that they don't have to carry the world's suffering alone, but can be a guide who helps others find their own light, without getting lost along the way. This mastery is only possible when empaths embrace their personal power, autonomy, and emotional sovereignty. This transformation process doesn't happen overnight. It's a long and winding journey, full of challenges, setbacks, and discoveries. It requires patience, self-compassion, and a deep commitment to oneself. However, each step taken in this direction strengthens the empath, bringing them greater clarity, balance, and joy in life. And in this movement, the empath finds an invisible community, others who are also awakening to this complexity, who share their challenges and victories, and who support each other on this journey of healing and growth. Together, they form a network of light that illuminates the shadows, showing that we are not alone on the soul's journey. Thus, the conscious empath is not just someone who feels, but someone who transforms. Someone who converts the weight of sensitivity into strength, who transforms borrowed pain into genuine wisdom, who transfigures vulnerability into serene power. It is this empath who walks the world as a true alchemist of the soul, bringing healing and light to themselves and the collective. This is the deepest and most urgent calling for those who recognize their empathic nature, to awaken to the sacred responsibility of their gift, to care for themselves with love and respect, and to live with the courage to be whole, complete, and free. Only then can empaths honor their true mission, illuminating the path for themselves and others, without losing themselves in the darkness they carry. This is the great transformation, from victim to master, from sponge to vessel, from shadow to living light. And it is in this light that the empath finds their true home, within themselves, in the pulsating center of their being. The empath's journey is a delicate dance between openness and protection, a constant balance between feeling deeply and preserving the integrity of one's being. As they advance on this path of self-discovery, they realize that it's not enough to simply acknowledge the shadows they carry. They must learn to embrace them, dance with them, and transform them into sources of growth and personal power. Carl Jung taught us that true shadow integration does not consist in eliminating the dark parts of the psyche, but rather in accepting them as living, essential, and inseparable parts of the human whole. For the empath, this shadow is particularly complex and multifaceted, intertwined with both personal and collective, ancestral shadows that they have unconsciously absorbed. Many of the most intense emotions they experience, such as repressed anger, deep sadness, and deep-seated fear, are not just isolated feelings, but living manifestations of these shadows, charged with ancient histories, unresolved pain, and emotional patterns that span generations. This dark density can manifest in subtle and powerful ways: an inexplicable fatigue that doesn't dissipate with rest, a sadness that arises for no apparent reason, vivid, symbolic dreams that convey disturbing images but are invitations to reflection and healing. The empath feels these manifestations as echoes of a past that doesn't directly belong to them, but which they carry as a silent legacy. Recognizing this emotional and psychic ancestry is an act of immense courage. It involves confronting painful family histories, repetitive patterns that have been established in your lineage and that have often remained hidden, waiting to be seen so they can be dissolved. This awareness is not an additional burden, but the key to breaking cycles of suffering that span time, freeing not only the empath but also those who came before them and those who will come after. By deepening this integration, the empath discovers that their gift goes far beyond sensing what others feel. They are a guardian of the collective soul, a conduit connecting different times and spaces. This perception broadens their view of the world and themselves, offering a broader meaning to their mission, one that transcends the individual and touches the universal. However, this realization also brings with it the responsibility of discerning between healthy empathy and codependency. It's common for empaths to lose themselves in unbalanced relationships, trying to prove themselves through sacrifice and total surrender, confusing their worth with their ability to carry the pain of others. Jung warned of the danger of this wounded healer archetype, which traps the empath in a painful repetition, where they are both sufferer and savior, unable to free themselves. Breaking this dynamic requires the empath to develop what Jung called a psychic membrane, an inner boundary that filters energies, protects against emotional invasions, and maintains clarity of identity. This membrane is not a rigid, insurmountable wall, but a living, flexible tissue, capable of embracing what nourishes and repelling what corrodes. Building this protection is an ongoing process that requires self-awareness, discipline, and conscious practices. Meditation, therapeutic writing, contact with nature, breathing exercises, and therapeutic support are powerful tools for strengthening this inner barrier and increasing the empath's emotional resilience. Furthermore, communicating your limits clearly and lovingly is essential to preserving your energy and mental health. Saying no without guilt, stepping away when necessary, respecting your own needs, and recognizing signs of overload are all attitudes that strengthen the empath's autonomy and prevent burnout. Another vital aspect is developing energetic awareness, the ability to perceive when an emotion belongs to oneself and when it is borrowed from another. This conscious sensitivity transforms the empath from a passive sponge into an active and selective channel, choosing where to place their attention and energy. Learning to filter, transmute, and release these energies is essential for the empath to live in balance and fulfillment. As this awareness matures, the empath learns to use their sensitivity as a tool for healing and transformation, both for themselves and others. They cease to be a vessel accumulating suffering and become a living instrument of wisdom and light, capable of illuminating the shadows without being consumed by them. The awakened empath understands that their strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to feel deeply and yet remain whole and centered. This serene strength arises from the alignment between heart and mind, between vulnerability and steadfastness, between openness and protection, a delicate balance achieved through practice and self-love. In this state of balance, the empath not only survives but thrives, living authentically and contributing to collective healing in a conscious and sustainable way. They recognize that their mission is not to carry the world alone, but to be a guide who helps others find their own light, without losing their identity. This profound transformation is a never-ending journey, made up of advances and setbacks, challenges and victories, learning and constant renewal. It requires patience, self-compassion, and a commitment to self-growth. It is this commitment that allows the empath to step into their true power, walk with presence, and offer the world not a burden, but a gift, a light that warms, welcomes, and transforms, a beacon in the darkness that guides other souls in search of healing and integration. Thus, the empath becomes master of their own energy, an alchemist of their own soul, transmuting sensitivity into strength and wisdom, fully living their unique and precious nature. This is the true essence of the conscious empath, a whole being, capable of loving without losing themselves, of feeling without being consumed, of existing in harmony with their light and shadow. The awakened empath begins to realize that their journey is not just a solitary journey, but an intimate dance with the collective, an invisible web where each emotional thread resonates with the whole. This awareness expands the responsibility they carry, as they understand that it is not just their own soul that is at stake, but the balance of countless other souls that, consciously or unconsciously, depend on their integrity to maintain a healthy energy field. In this context, communication becomes a vital tool for empaths. It's not just about talking, but about expressing oneself authentically, clearly, and respectfully, both to oneself and to others. When empaths learn to articulate their limits, needs, and emotions, they build real bridges that foster understanding and mutual respect. This internal and external dialogue helps strengthen their psychic membrane, as it gives voice to what was previously silent or repressed, preventing accumulated emotions from exploding into unexpected crises. The art of communicating deeply is also an invitation for empaths to cultivate active listening, the kind that welcomes without judging, perceives without absorbing, and understands without getting lost. This conscious listening expands their capacity to be present, without giving in to the compulsion to fix, control, or carry the other person's burden. It's a listening that respects the other person's space and honors their own inner space, creating a safe space for true encounter. But this practice of communication and listening isn't limited to words spoken aloud. For empaths, unexpressed feelings, hidden pain, and charged silences often speak louder than any speech. Learning to interpret these subtle signals is part of the journey, as it allows them to recognize the invisible dynamics at work in relationships and avoid being manipulated by projections or unspoken needs. Over time, the awakened empath develops a fine-tuned intuition, not a mystical, distant intuition, but a practical, concrete sensitivity that helps them navigate the emotional complexities of the world around them. This intuition is like an internal compass that points to where their energy should go, when to remain steady, and when to retreat for self-preservation. This ability to perceive and respond with discernment prevents empaths from getting lost in other people's dramas or becoming a refuge for unintegrated shadows. They learn to recognize when a relationship or situation is out of balance and make decisions that favor their emotional health, even if it means distancing themselves or establishing firm boundaries. This process, however, is not without its challenges. Empaths often face profound dilemmas, such as guilt over not being able to help everyone, fear of rejection when setting limits, or the difficulty accepting that not everyone desires or is ready for healing. Jung warned us that empathy without discernment can lead to suffering and self-loss, and the awakened empath must be alert to these signs to avoid falling into the traps of codependency. Therefore, developing self-awareness is essential for empaths to recognize their emotional patterns and automatic reactions, dismantling mechanisms that keep them trapped in cycles of exhaustion. Self-observation practices, such as journaling, meditation, and therapy, are essential tools for deepening this understanding and promoting true change. Furthermore, sharing these experiences and learnings with other empaths creates a space for collective support and strengthening. Knowing that you are not alone, that others face similar challenges, and that together you can journey toward integration, is a powerful encouragement that strengthens emotional resilience. Therefore, we invite you to reflect. When have you felt the need to set a limit but hesitated? How has your internal and external communication been when faced with the emotional demands you receive? Share your experiences in the comments, as this exchange is part of the healing and growth process. By opening this dialogue, you not only strengthen your own journey but also help other empaths find inspiration and courage to follow their path with greater clarity and balance. After all, each shared story is a light that illuminates the collective path, a further step toward integration and respect for the sensitivity we carry. This simple yet profound act of communicating and listening is a bridge that connects the empath's individuality with the greater universe, showing that feeling is a sacred gift, but that feeling with wisdom is the true art that transforms life. Therefore, allow yourself to express, allow yourself to listen, and allow yourself to grow. This is the essence of the conscious empath, one who chooses not only to feel, but also to assert, protect, and respect themselves, building healthy and sustainable relationships where empathy is a source of life, not a burden. In the silence of your heart, where all emotions dance in harmony, lies the sacred space of encounter with yourself and others. It is in this space that the empath finds their true power, a power that doesn't need to be shouted, for it resonates silently in the depths of the soul, transforming shadows into light and pain into wisdom. As empaths delve deeper into their own journey of self-discovery and healing, they begin to understand that the balance between sensitivity and protection is not a static state, but a dynamic and ongoing process. They realize that, to maintain their integrity in the world, it is necessary to cultivate a loving and conscious relationship with themselves, one that allows them to honor their own needs, respect their limits, and preserve their internal rhythms. This relationship with themselves is the fundamental foundation for ensuring that empathy does not become a crushing burden, but rather remains a powerful source of genuine connection and inner strength. As this internal connection strengthens, the empath develops a heightened sensitivity to perceive the subtle signs of emotional and energetic overload before they manifest as profound crises. They learn to listen to their body, that wise voice that often speaks before the mind realizes, and to identify sensations such as extreme fatigue, unexplained physical pain, restlessness, and silent anxiety. These signs are precious indicators that their energy is being drained and that it's time to slow down, take care of themselves, and renew their strength. Ignoring these signals is to plunge into the spiral of exhaustion so many empaths experience, where the soul tires before the body and the mind loses clarity. Jung taught that individuation is a process of continuous discovery and integration, marked by cycles of advances and retreats, lights and shadows. For the empath, this inner journey is even more complex, as it involves not only dealing with one's own shadows but also managing the shadows absorbed from the collective. This dual responsibility can be challenging, but it brings an expansion of consciousness that brings one closer to the essence of the human being in its entirety. During this journey, empaths learn to incorporate practices that offer sustenance and balance. Techniques such as daily meditation, conscious breathing exercises, regular contact with nature, and moments of intentional silence become sacred rituals that renew their energy and strengthen their psychic membrane. These practices are not luxuries or escapism, but true acts of self-love and emotional survival, necessary for them to continue exercising their gift without losing themselves or becoming exhausted. Another fundamental aspect that empaths discover is the importance of being deeply connected to their own body. Often, they focus only on emotions and thoughts, neglecting bodily messages that indicate imbalances. The body is a living map of the psyche. It manifests accumulated tensions, energetic blockages, and signals that something needs to be transformed. By developing this body listening, empaths create a direct channel for self-care and preventing burnout. Furthermore, awakened empaths realize the value of cultivating relationships that respect their sensitivity and promote their emotional autonomy. Being close to people who truly understand them, who don't demand sacrifice or self-denial, is vital for them to grow and flourish. These connections serve as safe spaces where empaths can express themselves fully, be vulnerable without fear, and receive genuine support, strengthening their resilience. However, empaths also face the challenge of loneliness, which often accompanies their process of strengthening boundaries and distancing themselves from toxic situations. This solitude, far from being a void, is a fertile space for introspection, deep self-knowledge, and reconnection with their purest essence. Jung asserted that encountering oneself is a solitary and transformative experience, necessary for the awakening of consciousness and psychic maturity. By embracing this solitude consciously, the empath discovers an inexhaustible source of serenity and inner strength, which sustains them in the face of the emotional storms of the external world. This strength does not arise from denying pain or escaping suffering, but from fully accepting the human experience in all its complexity, the light and shadow, the laughter and tears, the vulnerability and courage. In the process of integration, empaths understand that their sensitivity shouldn't be a solitary burden, but a gift shared with responsibility and balance. Self-care is the foundation for being truly present for others, without losing oneself or becoming exhausted. This conscious presence is the essence of true empathy, an encounter that respects personal limits and promotes healing, both for oneself and for the collective. Jung taught us that individuation is a journey, not a fixed destination. For the empath, this journey is accomplished in small, daily steps, conscious choices that honor their energy, their truth, and their own rhythm. It's a path that requires patience, self-compassion, and a constant commitment to their own emotional and spiritual well-being. Within this journey, empaths develop the ability to observe their emotions with a mindful and compassionate eye, without blindly identifying with them. This conscious observation allows them to choose how to respond to emotional experiences, breaking old patterns of reactivity and creating new ways of caring for themselves and others. With this transformation, the empath becomes an agent of change not only for their own lives, but for the collective around them. Their balanced and conscious presence radiates calm, compassion, and clarity, inspiring others to also seek integration and healing. Thus, the empath advances toward a new way of being, where sensitivity and strength coexist harmoniously, where vulnerability is combined with firmness, and where openness is balanced with protection. This deep integration is what allows them to live fully, to love without losing themselves, to feel without being consumed. It is in this state of balance that the empath finds true freedom, the freedom to be whole, authentic, and powerful, a beacon that illuminates their own path and that of those who cross their path, offering light, acceptance, and wisdom. As the empath deepens their inner journey, it becomes clear that their sensitivity, so vast, intense, and profound, is merely a facet of their broader, more essential being. Within them lies an immutable essence, a spark that remains steadfast beyond the emotions that course through them, the pains and joys that accompany them. This essence is the core of the self, the luminous and serene point that Jung identified as the center of psychic wholeness, where light and shadow reconcile and coexist in perfect harmony. Recognizing and accessing this essence does not occur through reason or thought, but through a visceral experience, a surrender to the inner silence that dissolves distractions and reveals pure conscious presence. It is in this space of stillness and wholeness that the empath finds the strength to transcend the emotional storms that once seemed overwhelming and embrace the complexity of life without losing themselves. By inhabiting this core, the empath realizes that their sensitivity, though intense and broad, is a bridge, a channel that connects them not only to the vastness of their inner world, but also to the immensity of the collective emotional universe. This realization expands their responsibility, as they understand that their energy and integrity have a direct impact on the balance of many. With this awareness, the empath learns to use their gift wisely, discerning where to place their attention and energy, protecting their inner space from demands that could exhaust it. They cease to be hostage to automatic reactions and begin to act from a place of serene presence, where sensitivity is strengthened rather than overwhelmed. This transformation marks a profound advance in individuation, the Jungian process of becoming a complete and authentic being. For the empath, individuation means achieving emotional and spiritual autonomy, breaking free from external and internal influences that distract or imprison them. The path of individuation is challenging and requires courage to look at one's own shadows and accept that the compassion offered to others often masks a detachment from one's own suffering. Recognizing these dynamics is painful, but it opens the door to true healing and reintegration. Shadow integration allows empaths to live authentically, establishing healthy boundaries and nurturing relationships that respect their sensitivity without demanding sacrifice. They learn to find security in connecting with themselves, respecting their intuition, and recognizing their intrinsic worth, detaching themselves from the pursuit of external approval. This emotional maturity allows the empath to experience love in its fullest form, free from the bonds of dependence and sacrifice. They learn to love without self-denial, to surrender without losing their essence, to be present without absorbing the other's pain. At the apex of this process, the empath becomes an alchemist of their soul, one who transforms suffering into wisdom, vulnerability into strength, sensitivity into clarity. Their presence is welcoming without imprisoning, illuminating without burning, sustaining without suffocating. This mastery, however, is not a static state, but a continuous dance between openness and protection, surrender and autonomy, emotion and reason. The awakened empath understands that the journey is endless, full of challenges, learning, and constant renewal, and that embracing this journey with courage and compassion is what keeps them alive and whole. By experiencing this deep integration, the empath becomes a beacon for others, a living example of how sensitivity can coexist with strength, vulnerability with steadfastness, and empathy with autonomy. Their light inspires and encourages those around them to also seek wholeness and healing, fostering a collective wave of transformation and awareness. Finally, the empath recognizes that their mission is not to carry the world's suffering, but to be a channel of light that awakens in others the capacity for healing and self-transformation. They walk with humility, knowing that each soul has its own time and journey, and that their role is to offer respectful presence, not control or imposition. In this acceptance lies profound peace, the peace that arises from the integration of shadows and light, from the acceptance of what is and the hope in what can be. It is this peace that frees the empath to experience their sensitivity as a sacred gift, to love without losing themselves, to feel without being consumed, to exist fully in their human and divine complexity. Thus, the empath finds true freedom, the freedom to be whole, authentic, and powerful, a beacon that illuminates not only their own path, but also the path of those who cross their path, offering them light, acceptance, and eternal wisdom. By reaching this point in their journey, the empath has already traveled a profound path of self-discovery, faced the shadows that once consumed them, and begun to discover the luminous essence that resides within. Now, more than ever, they understand that being an empath is more than simply feeling the pain and joy of others. It is a calling to master one's own energy, to the art of being a conscious channel of healing, presence, and transformation. This mastery arises from integration, from the acceptance of all aspects of being, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, surrender and protection. The awakened empath knows that their power lies not in fleeing from suffering, but in the courage to face it, embrace it, and transform it. They are no longer a sponge absorbing everything around them, but a wise vessel that allows energy to pass through without getting lost in it. This profound transformation is an invitation for you, who are following this journey, to also recognize the immense value you carry within. You are not here by chance. Something in your soul resonated with these words, and this awakening is a sign of your capacity to grow, heal, and free yourself. You are a sensitive, powerful being worthy of love, and true freedom is within your reach. As you reflect on everything explored so far, I want to remind you that this journey is ongoing. The path of the conscious empath is made of daily choices, of practices that strengthen your energy, respect your limits, and promote your expansion. With each step, you become more whole, more connected to yourself, and more capable of offering the world the light that only you can radiate. If this content touched your heart, if it awakened something within you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where together we explore the depths of the soul, the mysteries of deep psychology, and the paths of healing and self-knowledge. Subscribe so you don't miss future sessions, as this journey is ongoing, and each new insight can be a key to your transformation. Like this video if you feel this message resonates with you, if you recognize that being an empath is a complex and wonderful gift. Your like helps spread this wisdom to more people who, like you, seek to live with greater awareness and balance. And last but not least, share your experience in the comments. What's been the most impactful discovery you've had so far? How have you been caring for your sensitivity? Your story could be the light someone needs to continue their own journey. Together, we form a community of awakened souls, connected by the desire to live authentically and lovingly. You are privileged to be here, to allow yourself to delve into yourself with such courage and openness. It's not every day that we find space to listen to the voice of our soul, to dialogue with our shadows, and to celebrate our light. This moment is yours, a precious gift of self-discovery and expansion. Remember Carl Jung's words, which echo as an eternal invitation to transformation: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who we truly are. You are on that path. Every conscious choice you make, every boundary you set, every emotion you embrace, is a step toward becoming the truest, most whole and powerful version of yourself. Now, carry this light with you. Live with a firm heart and a serene mind. Be an empath, yes, but also be a master of your own energy, an alchemist of your soul. You don't need to carry the world, but you do need to carry yourself with dignity, love, and respect. I thank you for your presence on this profound journey. May it continue to inspire, strengthen, and illuminate your days. We are together, always. Until the next meeting, remain steadfast, conscious, and uniquely you, a beacon of light in the vast ocean of existence.